Welcome to Story Time. I'm Ald the Elder, hashtag Old Not Sage, and today we're going to read two short stories from Craig Madison. We have first Creation, and then, hopefully I don't mispronounce this too badly, Arcuation. I think I got it. Anyway, it is Monday, and I'm wearing what I want to wear, so it must be time for Creation by Craig Madison. The story of the creation of Emphalis as was told to Spike and Neko by Merlin, the Primordial Angel. Before Emphalis, a singular entity existed purely because it did, and other entities were born from its existence. It birthed the creators who crafted their worlds and dimensions, each according to their desires, but all stemming from its power. This is Primus Supremis, the original, the first cause, and the progenitor of all. His creation is a testament to his magnificence. It is breathtaking, sprawling, and intricate tapestry of worlds, dimensions, and stories that stretch beyond the limits of imagination. Creare, one of the beings he created, went on to design this dimension and the galaxies, stars, and planets that make it up, including Emphalis. But soon after, the creators began creating their worlds. Primus Supremis made himself inaccessible, a decision that still shrouds in mystery, preferring to watch the events unfolding in these worlds rather than actively participating in them. Left to their own, the creators began to design and create living creatures of their own. So Creare created 7 children, 3 boys he called gods, and 4 girls he called goddesses. He gave dominion over all the elements he had created in his dimension to his children, and over his children he placed the wisest and youngest of them, the goddess of balance, Kiana, queen of the gods. Over light he placed Lux, over darkness Tenebris, fire Infernus, water Aqua, Aereus wind, and earth went to Terra. Amongst themselves, off on the planet Emphalis, the gods and goddesses, the architects of this world, began to create animals, elves, and lastly angels, a race Lux designed to watch over Emphalis from Emphalis. Lux created 16 angels, me included, the Primordials, as we called ourselves, beings as strong as demigods to those we were to watch over. And we angels had a king, the last angel to be created, Hikaru Kirikotsu, blessed by each god and goddess to help him reign over Emphalis. His first 3 children became the first incarnations, death, destiny, and destruction, and his last child became his heir, setting the standard for the Kirikotsu line of succession. Hikaru reigned for 8 mega-annas, succeeded by his youngest son and his youngest son to the last king of Andratis. To this day, the king of Andratis is also supreme king over Emphalis, as decreed by Kiana, goddess of balance and queen of the gods. And now the weight of this destiny falls upon your shoulders. You are to be king of Andratis and over Emphalis, a role that carries with it the hopes and dreams of countless beings. Arcuation by Craig Madison. Hikaru, please, you cannot do this. You are our king, our leader. What are we to do? Implored Merlin as tears streamed down his face. He tried to stand stoically and compose himself, but it was useless. There was no way he could compose himself as he watched his closest friend prepare to sacrifice himself. Hikaru just stood on the edge of the cliff, looking out onto the 3 figures that approached them, the figures of 3 of his 4 sons, the incarnations of destiny, death, and destruction, Lyla, Sun Ren. Are we just going to let our king, started Merlin as he turned to face the other 2 primordial angels standing several feet behind him and Hikaru. Enough, Merlin, Lyla said sternly, with little emotion in her brown eyes. Hikaru's queen had always been good at compartmentalizing her feelings, but Merlin had figured something to this extreme must be too much for her to bear. He found now that he was wrong, that Lyla's strength had once again surpassed his expectations. Faced with the death of her husband, or all but one of her children, or the possible death of her husband and three of her children, Lyla did nothing but maintain her stern smile and watch her husband's large red wings as they spread wide before them. Enough! Not enough, I should say, shouted Merlin angrily, waving his staff at in Lyla's direction. Sun Ren was between them in a second, her green feathers shielding Lyla from Merlin's view. Sun Ren stared up at Merlin in bewilderment, her green eyes searching his for the usually calm, carefree man she loved. You too, Sun Ren? He asked, sounding as if he was pleading for her to join his case. Indeed, the commander of Hikaru's guard would be against the king going to his apparent death. Do you expect me to embarrass our king's resolve by crying and pleading like a child as well? Or would you rather I die helplessly at his feet before he goes and does what he wants anyway? Sun Ren paused momentarily to let what she said sink in and continued. Hikaru looked over our options thoroughly before deciding on this course of action. The demons must be protected, and this is the only way to do it. You blabber as fools, said Hikaru calmly, facing the other three primordial angels standing between him. His icy blue eyes were stone cold and focused on the task in front of him, the entirety of his will on righting the way things were. I may have been king of the nation of Andratis and supreme king over all of Emphalis, but more importantly than all of that to me, I am the father of three mighty children who are misbehaving. Should I burrow you into the ground and hide as prey before a predator, or should I stand on the edge of this cliff, overlooking my prey as a predator? Should I leave the world to the wiles and whims of three brats in charge of death, destiny, and destruction, or should I stand against them as the only being with the power to do so? The world is not your concern anymore. Both it and these three children turned their backs on you when they cast you out and named you Archdemon. How can a child turn its back on a parent? As a parent, is it not my job to correct this behavior and to turn my child around and back onto the right path? Merlin, I had always counted you as the wisest of us, so I left you the task. I have left. However, it's obvious that your emotions are clouding your judgment. If I do not choose to stand against my children and bend the path of destiny, then all Emphalis will come to be destroyed. Should I value my own life over all of existence, though my life would inevitably end with all of existence? If I do not do this alone, if I should even have the help of but one of you, everything will be for naught. I understand how you feel, Merlin, and I'm not sure Lyla feels worse than either of us could imagine. But at the end of this day, and on the day in the far future I have told you of, you will see why it is I had to do this. Merlin was silent as Hikaru finished. Before he started, he knew he would be unable to change Hikaru's mind, but he knew also that he would never come to regret this moment, the moment he had begged his friend to live. He placed his staff in front of him, focusing on the four feathers that dangled from the upside-down crescent that adorned its top. One of each of them, red for Hikaru, purple for Lyla, green for Sun Ren, and pink for Merlin, and took a deep breath. Then I will do as my king commands and set up a barrier upon their arrival. I head back to Andratis to maintain my position as head of the royal guard and steward. I will ensure your youngest stays on his current path as king of Andratis, said Sun Ren, rising into the air on her green wings and kissing Merlin. Though it is never and will never bear fruit, Merlin, know that my love for you is unwavering. Though our duties take us down separate paths, know that I am always with you in my heart and spirit. Hikaru Kirikotsu, my king, the last created of us, and the greatest of us, to him the goddess Kiana be it bestowed the gift of twilight to bring balance to all things. Hikaru is the master of the four divine beasts, subjugator of the four demonic beasts, and wielder of the gifts of the gods of light and darkness. It has been a pleasure and an honor to have spent these millions of years in your service. I promise to continue to serve as you have asked until the time my light shall depart. And she took off west towards Andratis. On the last day of the last month of our 8th Mega Anna, I watched as the love of my life stood against the product of our love and my womb. And after I watched the horror, I, Lyla, the first mother, cast an enchantment over all Emphalis. Whenever a child turns a hand against their line, they are cursed, and all those follow forth. Woe to those who spill familial blood. And Lyla stepped up to Hikaru and kissed him passionately before he took off towards their children. Merlin set up the barrier around them 50 miles in every direction as Hikaru had specified. Father, the voice of his eldest son, the incarnation of death, came as Hikaru landed before them. Hikaru looked over the faces of the 3 men he had raised, almost seeing them for the boys they had been millennia ago, when they had become the twisted men that now stood before him. What had shifted in them that had made them despise him and their mother? And do you expect to beat the 3 of us? Asked Destiny with a wry smile on his face. You know I know how this ends. We kill you and then go on about our day as if nothing ever happened. And the threads of destiny have already been sewn. You die. You boys forget that the basis for all of your powers comes from me, said Hikaru, standing at his full height and towering a whole foot over his sons. Dark energy rippled around them, increasing the pressure so much that the 4 began to sink into the ground. You may be the incarnation of destiny, but you cannot force people to choose. You see the results of actions and consequences, not destiny. And I killed people before there was a need for the incarnation of death. Do you think yourself special because it's not as hard for you? And destruction, he cackled loudly here. Mere children can do that without needing a fancy title or power from gods. The 3 of you are no more than just high-powered kids throwing a tantrum. And now Daddy's getting the belt. The energy around them entered Hikaru and then condensed, transforming his physical form in a way the incarnations had never experienced. He now stood 10 feet tall, 4 feet over death. His face was now covered by a mask of bone from the front, of which had sprouted the 2 cruel-looking curved 18-inch horns. His large red feathered wings were now 4 in number and a much darker deep red color. His hands and feet now ended in claws, 6 inches long and curved inwards. His chest, arms, and legs that they could see were now each covered in some bone exoskeleton. The incarnations all took a step back, unnerved by their father's demonic transformation. They had never seen or even heard of anything like this. They had known that their father's primordial gift of darkness allowed him to control dark energy, but they had never imagined he could use it this way. In his base angelic form, his father would have been no problem at all. And as a transformed angel, a radiant, as their father called it, the 3 of them might have struggled, but this was something that had never even entered their thoughts or imaginations. As if on cue, the other 2 incarnations turned to Destiny, who was so bewildered that his mouth was moving, but no words were coming out. Before he could add speech to the movements of his mouth, his father was upon him, picking him up by his head with his left hand and slamming him down onto the ground. The ground around the 2 cratered, causing death and destruction to jump even further back. Destruction aimed a colossal blast of fire at his father's wings, but it dissipated as it hit the dark energy pouring out of him. In all his life, Destruction had never seen this much energy pouring out of someone at once. He wasn't even sure he knew anyone with this much energy, let alone have it just leaking out of them. Hikaru lifted Destiny and slammed him again and again, watching as blood spurted out of his son and hearing as his bones began to crunch and break. Destiny was attempting to mutter now, but Hikaru could not make out what he was saying, as he had crushed his throat minutes ago. After numerous attempts, Death and Destruction finally managed to break through the wall of energy and, rushing at full speed, pushed Hikaru away from Destiny, who lay crumpled in the crater, covered in his own blood and bone fragments. Bones jutted out of him at every angle and interval, and his face was completely unrecognizable from the rest of the flesh that made him up. Destruction looked in horror at the mess that was his brother and then glanced at his father, who was roaring at the sky, his arms spread wide, his hands and torso covered in Destiny's blood. "He's still alive," said Destruction tragically, looking at Death with the same look he had when they had discovered an animal with a broken neck all those years ago. As he did now, Death had put the pitiful creature out of his misery, a hatred towards his hunter now burning within him. He hated cruelty and death above all things, and the demon who stood in front of them howling had enjoyed every moment of his cruel torturing of his younger brother. The air began to chill, and the grass around them began to die as Death rose, his pale purple wings spread wide. Hikaru stopped howling and stared up at Death, his attention now on new prey. He took off into the air toward him, but was intercepted by Destruction, who had abandoned throwing spells at Hikaru and had decided to throw his magic-enhanced hands instead. Hikaru parried the first blow with his left forearm and countered with a right to Destruction's side, who screamed in pain. Death slammed down with both fists to the top of Hikaru's exoskull, sending him reeling towards the ground. They both dived after him, sending shots of fire and ice spikes as they did so. Hikaru spun around in the air and stopped his descent. Upon seeing the fire and ice, he waved his hand and they dissipated. Death continued his dive and threw a punch into Hikaru's abdomen, surprised when a new pair of arms extended from each side of Hikaru and pulled him into a death grip. The latest set of arms flexed and squeezed Death against his father's body, crushing him against the muscle and exoskeleton that had grown over most of Hikaru's body. Death screamed as Destruction continued to help him, charging as much energy into his fist as possible before he swung hard with his right, connecting with Hikaru's chin. Hikaru's original right arm grabbed Destruction as he had Destiny, his entire head in one hand, and flung him to his right, sending him spiraling through the air. He then began to pummel Death, who was still being pressed against him, his bones breaking and snapping as their resistance gave out. Destruction landed on the ground, and they looked over the helpless scene before him. Their demon father had transformed once again into some horse-demon hybrid with 4 legs and 4 arms. Death no longer struggled against his father and just hung limply there, partially plastered to his father's chest by his blood and guts. Hikaru opened his 4 arms wide as if welcoming Destruction, who shuddered in horror at the thought of being held off by his father in this form. They had been foolish to think that being incarnations would have been enough to close the gap between them and their father. There had been no gap between them and their father. Their father had been the very thing by which all gaps and abysses are measured. He was the same person who defined these words. He was the twilight the gods had instilled between the day and the night, the balance between all things. He could arcuate destiny, kill death, and turn destruction into creation. From their bodies, life would spring, and through his actions, his father would show that even these things could be subjugated through will. "This is it then, Father," yelled Destruction as he gathered energy into himself, preparing to detonate himself with enough force to destroy the planet. Hikaru started sauntering towards where Destruction was, escaping Destiny out of the crater as he passed and slung him over the backers of his horse body. Destruction gathered more energy as his father neared, resolved that this was the only way. If their father had died, he would have been fine letting the leaderless demons roam Emphalis until they were eventually exterminated. But he could not allow his father to live and lead the demons. This would solve all those problems, and the gods could start over after the mess cleared. As Hikaru neared him, energy began to rip through Destruction, tearing him apart. He released the full force of the power. He watched it rippling outwards, hanging on by sheer willpower as he watched his father continue to stroll towards him, the energy from the blast starting to disintegrate his transformed body cell by cell. When what was left of Hikaru finally reached the epicenter and what was left of Destruction, he embraced him, and then the two proceeded into the void. Outside the barrier, Merlin and Sun Ren watched in horror as the explosion rocked the planet. but the barrier protected Emphalis as Hikaru had intended. Merlin knew, without having to check, that all four had perished in this fight, and that there was nothing left for him to do now but to follow the command he had been given. He bid Lyla goodbye, and then evaporated into the sunset, the water vapor he had become carried away by the wind. Lyla collapsed to her knees and wept, her heart broken beyond repair. She felt that when each of their lives had expired, Hikaru's life ending felt much like hers. Tears and blood spilled from her eyes, and she used them to cast her enchantment over all Emphalis. Woe to all who forsake the first mother's warning, a curse upon them and the line of all who spill familial blood. When her task was done, Lyla spread her purple wings and took off south, past the elvish lands of Zephyr, where her light departed this world.